The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, just as I was unloading my newest project from the truck. And I knew immediately it was going to be trouble because the return address said Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association in that pretentious cursive font they loved so much. I'm Kevin Bradley, been living in this Colorado Springs neighborhood for 3 years now, working as a certified welder and metal fabricator. My garage has been my workshop since day one, and nobody had said a word about it until now. I set down the steel beams I was carrying and ripped open the envelope, already feeling my blood pressure rising. The letter was typed on cream-colored paper with their stupid oak leaf watermark, signed by someone named Deborah Patterson, HOA president. It informed me in the coldest, most bureaucratic language possible that my welding equipment was in violation of neighborhood covenants and had to be removed within 30 days. They cited fire hazards, noise complaints, and something about maintaining property values. The letter threatened daily fines of $500 if I didn't comply. I read it 3 times, each time getting angrier. My welding rig was state certified. I carried $1 million in liability insurance, and I'd taken every safety precaution known to man. My garage had proper ventilation, fire suppression systems, and I only worked during reasonable hours. This was my livelihood, not some hobby I could just pack away. The next morning, I called the number listed on the letterhead. A woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice sugary sweet, but with an edge that told me she enjoyed her position of petty power. Oakwood Heights, HOA, this is Deborah speaking. Hi, this is Kevin Bradley on Pinecrest Drive. I got your letter about my welding equipment, and I need to discuss this with you. The sweetness evaporated instantly. Mr. Bradley, the letter was quite clear. The board has determined your commercial activities violate our residential covenants. You have 30 days to remove the equipment or face fines. But I've had this set up for 3 years. Why is it suddenly a problem? We received complaints from neighbors about noise and safety concerns. The board takes these matters very seriously. What neighbors? I work reasonable hours, and I've never had anyone say anything to me directly. I'm not at liberty to disclose that information. The decision has been made, Mr. Bradley. You can appeal to the board at next month's meeting if you wish, but I wouldn't get your hopes up. The condescension in her voice made me want to reach through the phone. I'm a licensed professional with full insurance and all required certifications. I'm not running some backyard chop shop here. That's irrelevant. This is a residential neighborhood, not an industrial zone. Good day, Mr. Bradley. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, stunned by the sheer arrogance. 3 years of peaceful coexistence, and now some busybody with a clipboard was threatening my entire business. I spent the rest of that day gathering documentation. My welding certifications from the American Welding Society, my business license, my insurance policies, my inspection reports from when I'd installed the equipment. Everything was legitimate and above board. I'd even gone beyond the required safety standards because I took this stuff seriously. The next Tuesday, I showed up at the community center for the HOA board meeting. The room was set up like a courtroom, with a long table at the front where 5 board members sat looking important. Deborah Patterson was in the center, a woman in her late 40s with highlighted blonde hair cut in that specific soccer mom style, and wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She had that particular expression I'd come to recognize over the years, the one that said she'd peaked in high school as a mean girl and was reliving those glory days through HOA enforcement. About 20 other homeowners were scattered in the folding chairs, most looking bored or checking their phones. I took a seat in the front row and waited through 40 minutes of tedious discussions about landscaping requirements and paint color approvals. Finally, Deborah called my name. Item 7. Complaint regarding commercial activities at 2847 Pinecrest Drive. Mr. Bradley, you have 5 minutes to address the board. I stood up, carrying my folder of documents. Thank you. I'm here to appeal the decision to ban my welding equipment. I'm a certified welder with full insurance and all required licenses. I've brought documentation showing that my setup meets or exceeds all safety standards. I approached the table and tried to hand her the folder. She didn't take it. Mr. Bradley, we're not concerned with your certifications. Our covenants clearly state that home-based businesses must not create noise, odors, or safety hazards that affect other residents. But I don't create any of those things. I work during normal business hours, my ventilation system eliminates odors, and my garage is equipped with professional-grade fire suppression equipment. A man to Deborah's left, who introduced himself as board member Gerald something, spoke up. We have multiple complaints about noise and bright flashes at all hours. That's not true. I've never worked past 7 p.m. or before 8 a.m., and my garage doors are closed when I'm welding, which blocks the light. Deborah cut in, her voice sharp. Are you calling our complainants liars, Mr. Bradley? I'm saying there's been a misunderstanding. Can I see the complaints? Maybe if I know specific concerns, I can address them. The complaints are confidential. This board has reviewed them and found them credible. How can I defend myself against anonymous accusations? This isn't a criminal trial, Mr. Bradley. We're simply enforcing our covenants to maintain community standards. Your appeal is noted and denied. You have 26 days remaining to remove the equipment. She moved to bang her gavel, but I wasn't done. I request a formal inspection by a qualified professional. Let the fire marshal or a building inspector evaluate my setup. If they find any violations, I'll shut down immediately. That made her pause. Several board members exchanged glances. A woman on the end, older with gray hair, looked interested. That seems reasonable, the gray-haired woman said. Janet Morrison, by the way. I think we should allow an independent inspection before forcing Mr. Bradley to dismantle his business. Deborah's jaw tightened. The covenants don't require outside inspections for enforcement decisions. But they don't prohibit them either, Janet countered. And it would protect the HOA from liability if there really is a safety issue. I could see Deborah doing calculations in her head, trying to figure out how to maintain control. Finally, she gave a tight smile. Fine. Mr. Bradley, you may arrange for a fire marshal inspection. If they find any violations, the equipment must be removed immediately and you'll pay all associated fines. If they approve your setup, we'll revisit the matter. It wasn't a full victory, but it was something. Thank you. I'll contact them tomorrow. Meeting adjourned. The gavel banged, and Deborah immediately started gathering her papers, avoiding eye contact with me. I left feeling cautiously optimistic. An inspection would prove I was running a safe, professional operation. The fire marshal would see that, and this whole thing would blow over. I was wrong about how smoothly it would go. The next morning, I called the Colorado Springs Fire Department and explained the situation. The dispatcher connected me to Deputy Fire Marshal Thomas Chen, who listened patiently to my explanation. So your HOA is claiming your welding setup is unsafe? He asked. Yes, sir. But I've got all the proper equipment, certifications, everything. I just need someone official to verify that so they'll get off my back. I can come by Friday morning around 10. I'll need to see your insurance documentation, your certifications, and inspect the physical setup. That's perfect. Thank you. Friday morning, I cleaned the garage until it was spotless. Every piece of equipment was organized, every safety label visible, every fire extinguisher checked and ready. My paperwork was arranged in neat folders on my workbench. Deputy Marshal Chen arrived exactly at 10 in a white SUV marked with the fire department logo. He was a compact man in his mid-30s, wearing a uniform and carrying a clipboard and camera. His handshake was firm and professional. "Mr. Bradley, good to meet you. Let's take a look at what we've got here." I gave him the grand tour, explaining each piece of equipment and the safety measures I'd implemented. He took notes, snapped photos, and asked detailed technical questions that showed he knew his stuff. He spent extra time examining my ventilation system and fire suppression setup. "This is impressive," he said, running his hand along the ventilation ductwork. "This is commercial-grade equipment. I take safety seriously. I can't risk a fire or injury." He reviewed my insurance documents, my AWS certifications, and my inspection records from the equipment installations. After about 90 minutes, he set down his clipboard and turned to me. "Mr. Bradley, I'm going to be straight with you. This is one of the best equipped home shops I've ever seen. You've got better safety measures than some professional fabrication shops I've inspected. Everything is up to code and beyond. Your ventilation exceeds requirements, your fire suppression is top-notch, and your equipment is all properly maintained." Relief flooded through me. "So you'll write that up in a report?" "Absolutely. I'll have the official inspection report ready by Monday." "You're in full compliance with all fire safety codes and regulations." He paused, frowning slightly. "Can I ask you something off the record?" "Sure." "What's really going on with your HOA? Because this inspection request feels personal." "Usually when we get called for something like this, there's an actual hazard. But you're running a textbook operation here." I shrugged. "Honestly, I think someone on the board just doesn't like me or doesn't want a business in the neighborhood. But I've been here 3 years without any problems until now." "That's what I figured." "Well, my report will be factual and thorough. You've got nothing to worry about from a safety standpoint." He left, and I immediately felt a huge weight lift. I had official confirmation from the fire marshal that my setup was safe and legal. Deborah and her board couldn't argue with that. Monday afternoon, I received the inspection report via email. It was 6 pages of detailed findings, all positive. The conclusion stated clearly that my welding operation met or exceeded all applicable fire safety codes and posed no unusual risk to the neighborhood. Deputy Marshal Chen even noted that my safety measures were exemplary and a model for home-based fabrication work. I printed 5 copies, put them in a folder, and drove to Deborah's house that evening. She lived in one of the larger homes in the development, a 2-story colonial with an immaculate lawn and a doormat that said, "Bless this home." She answered the door in yoga pants and a cardigan, clearly not expecting visitors. Her expression soured when she saw me. "Mr. Bradley, this is inappropriate. HOA business should be conducted through official channels." "I have the fire marshal report." He inspected my garage and found everything in full compliance. I wanted to deliver it personally. I held out the folder. She took it reluctantly, flipping through the pages with pursed lips. "This doesn't change anything," she said after a moment. "How can it not change anything? You said the issue was safety. The fire marshal confirms there's no safety issue. The issue is also noise and commercial activity in a residential zone. This report doesn't address those concerns. I work normal business hours, and I've never had a legitimate noise complaint." "Who's actually complaining about me?" Her eyes narrowed. "That's confidential, as I've told you, and your defensive attitude isn't helping your case. My defensive attitude. You're threatening to fine me $500 a day for running a legal business out of my own garage. Lower your voice, Mr. Bradley. I won't be spoken to that way on my own doorstep. Then stop making up reasons to shut me down. I've proven my setup is safe. What else do you want? She stepped back and started to close the door. You'll receive our formal response by mail. Good evening. The door shut in my face. I stood there for a moment, hands clenched, wanting to kick something. But that would just prove whatever point she was trying to make about me being unreasonable. I drove home and cracked open a beer, sitting in my garage and staring at the welding equipment I'd worked so hard to buy and maintain. None of this made sense. 3 years of no problems, and suddenly, I was public enemy number 1. The next morning, my neighbor Rick came over while I was checking my mail. Rick was a good guy, a software engineer who worked from home and had never complained about anything. He looked uncomfortable. Hey Kevin, got a minute? Sure, what's up? I heard about your trouble with the HOA. I wanted you to know I didn't complain about your welding. I don't even notice it most of the time. Thanks, man. That means a lot. Do you know who did complain? He glanced around as if checking for spies. I shouldn't say, but screw it. It's Deborah. She's been asking people on the street if your work bothers them, trying to drum up complaints. Most people told her no, but she's been really pushy about it. That confirmed what I'd suspected. Why does she care so much? I've never even talked to her before this. Her son Chad is a welder too. Has his own shop over on the east side. I think she doesn't want you taking business from him or something. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about safety or noise or property values. This was about Deborah using her HOA position to eliminate competition for her son's business. That was corruption, plain and simple. You know anyone else she approached? I asked. Yeah, she talked to the Hendersons across from you, the Johnsons 2 doors down, and I think the Martins on the corner. None of them had issues with you, though. Would any of them be willing to say that officially? Rick hesitated. I don't know, man. People are afraid of getting on Deborah's bad side. She can make life hell through the HOA. She's already making my life hell. I need people willing to stand up to her. I'll talk to them. See what I can do. He left, and I went inside to research Colorado HOA laws. If Deborah was abusing her position for personal gain, there had to be legal remedies. I spent hours reading statutes and case law. Colorado's Common Interest Ownership Act governed HOAs, and it had specific provisions about board members acting in good faith and avoiding conflicts of interest. A board member using their position to harm a competitor definitely seemed like a conflict of interest. I also discovered that HOA boards could be held personally liable for discriminatory enforcement of rules. If Deborah was singling me out while allowing other home businesses to operate, that was discrimination. I started documenting everything. I drove through the neighborhood and photographed 3 other houses running clear home businesses. One had a CPA's sign in the window. Another had a lawn care company's trucks parked in the driveway daily, and the third advertised dog grooming services right on their mailbox. If my welding was banned as commercial activity, those should be too. The formal response from the HOA arrived Thursday. It was even worse than I expected. Despite the fire marshal report, the board had voted to uphold the ban on my welding equipment. They acknowledged the safety inspection, but claimed the issue was now purely about commercial zoning and noise ordinances. I had 14 days left to remove the equipment or face fines. They'd also added a new twist. Starting immediately, I was banned from performing any welding work on the property, even if I didn't remove the equipment yet. Any violation would result in immediate fines and potential legal action. I was beyond angry now. This was my livelihood they were destroying. I had clients counting on me, projects in progress, bills to pay. I couldn't just shut down for 2 weeks while Deborah played power games. I called a lawyer Friday morning. Sarah Martinez's office was in downtown Colorado Springs, and she specialized in HOA disputes. Her secretary got me an appointment for that afternoon. Sarah was in her early 40s, professionally dressed, with a no-nonsense demeanor that I immediately appreciated. She listened to my story, reviewed the documents I'd brought, and nodded thoughtfully. "This is a clear case of selective enforcement and conflict of interest," she said. "The fact that her son owns a competing business and she's targeting you specifically is actionable. Plus, if you can prove other home businesses are operating without interference, that strengthens your discrimination claim. What are my options? We can file an injunction to prevent them from enforcing the ban while we litigate. We can also file complaints with the Colorado Attorney General's office about the conflict of interest, and we can potentially sue the HOA and Deborah personally for damages if you lose business because of this. How long will all that take?" "An injunction could be granted within a week or two if we move fast. The full litigation could take months, but the injunction would protect you in the meantime. Let's do it. Whatever it takes." She quoted me her retainer fee, which made me wince, but I didn't have much choice. I wrote the check and left her office feeling like I finally had some firepower on my side. Sarah filed the injunction request Monday morning. By Wednesday, we had a court date set for the following Tuesday. In the meantime, I received another letter from the HOA, this one informing me that my violation of the ban on welding work had been noted, and I was being fined $500. Someone had reported seeing welding flashes from my garage Tuesday evening. The thing was, I hadn't welded Tuesday evening. I'd been at Sarah's office until 6, then grabbed dinner with Rick. I'd gotten home after 8 and gone straight to bed. Someone was lying, and I was pretty sure I knew who. I called Sarah immediately. "They're claiming I violated the ban, but I wasn't even home when they say I was welding." "Can you prove that?" "I was at your office, then at Jake's Grill with my neighbor. I can get the restaurant receipt and Rick's statement." "Do that. This is actually good for us. If they're fabricating violations, it shows bad faith and strengthens our case." I met Rick for coffee that evening and explained the situation. He immediately agreed to provide a written statement confirming we'd been together Tuesday evening. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Deborah's out of control. It gets better. I think she or someone on the board is making up violations to justify the fines. That's fraud, isn't it? According to my lawyer, yes, but I need to prove it." An idea occurred to me. "Hey, do you still have those security cameras you installed last year?" Rick's house was diagonal from mine, with a clear view of my garage and driveway. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, and they record constantly. You think they'd show your garage was dark Tuesday evening?" "Exactly." "Would you be willing to pull that footage?" "Absolutely. Let's go check right now." We went back to his house and reviewed the security footage on his computer. The timestamp clearly showed my garage dark and my truck absent from the driveway Tuesday evening from 6 p.m. through 9 p.m. There were no welding flashes, no activity at all. Rick burned the footage to a USB drive and handed it to me. "Nail her." I sent the footage to Sarah, along with the receipt from Jake's Grill and Rick's written statement. She called me an hour later, sounding pleased. "This is excellent. They've documented a violation that we can definitively prove never happened. That shows intentional fraud by the HOA board. I'm adding that to our filing." Tuesday arrived, and I put on my best suit for the court hearing. Sarah met me outside the courtroom, briefcase in hand and looking confident. Remember, let me do the talking unless the judge asks you a direct question. Be respectful. Don't show anger even if Deborah or her lawyer says something outrageous. Got it. We entered the courtroom, a smaller chamber in the El Paso County Courthouse. Deborah was there with an attorney, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked bored. 3 other board members had come along, including Janet Morrison, the older woman who'd seemed sympathetic to me at the meeting. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Ruth Holloway. She reviewed the filings, then looked up at both parties. This is a hearing on a motion for preliminary injunction regarding HOA enforcement actions. Miss Martinez, you represent the plaintiff. Sarah stood. Yes, Your Honor. My client, Kevin Bradley, is a licensed and insured welder who has operated a home-based fabrication business for 3 years without incident. The HOA is attempting to ban his business despite fire marshal certification of his safety compliance, and despite allowing other home businesses to operate freely in the same neighborhood. The HOA's lawyer stood. Your Honor, David Crest representing Oakwood Heights HOA. The association has legitimate concerns about commercial activities in a residential neighborhood. The covenants clearly restrict such activities, and the board has authority to enforce those restrictions. Judge Holloway looked at Sarah. Counsel, can you establish irreparable harm? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Bradley will lose his business income if forced to shut down during litigation. He has existing client contracts and obligations. Additionally, the HOA has documented a violation that security footage proves never occurred, suggesting bad faith enforcement. That got the judge's attention. Explain. Sarah walked through the fake violation, the security footage, and my alibi. She submitted the evidence to the court. Judge Holloway reviewed it carefully, her expression darkening. Mr. Crest, does the HOA have any response to this? The lawyer looked uncomfortable. He conferred briefly with Deborah, who was whispering urgently. Your Honor, there may have been a misidentification of dates. We need to review our records. A misidentification. Judge Holloway's tone was dry. The violation notice is dated and specific. Either Mr. Bradley was welding Tuesday evening or he wasn't. The evidence suggests he wasn't. Sarah pressed the advantage. Your Honor, we also have evidence of selective enforcement. 3 other home businesses operate in the same neighborhood without HOA interference. We believe the board president has a conflict of interest, as her son owns a competing welding business. Is that true, Mr. Crest? The lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. The board president's son does own a welding business, but that's not relevant to the enforcement of covenants. It's absolutely relevant if she's using her position to eliminate competition for her son. Miss Martinez, do you have evidence of that? We have witness statements that Mrs. Patterson solicited complaints about Mr. Bradley from neighbors, and that most declined to complain. We also have documentation of the other home businesses operating without interference. Judge Holloway sat back, clearly displeased. Mr. Crest, this looks very bad for your client. You have a board president with an undisclosed conflict of interest, selective enforcement of rules, and apparent fabrication of violations. Why shouldn't I grant this injunction? Your Honor, the HOA board has broad discretion in covenant enforcement. Even if there were procedural irregularities, that doesn't mean Mr. Bradley has the right to violate the covenants. But you haven't established that he is violating covenants. The fire marshal certified his safety compliance. You've admitted other home businesses operate freely. And you can't explain the false violation report. She looked at her notes. I'm granting the preliminary injunction. The HOA is enjoined from enforcing the ban on Mr. Bradley's welding equipment pending full trial. The HOA is also ordered to provide documentation of all home businesses in the neighborhood and explain why Mr. Bradley was singled out. We'll reconvene in 30 days for a status conference." She banged the gavel. Sarah squeezed my arm, grinning. Deborah looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Outside the courtroom, Sarah was jubilant. "That went even better than I hoped. Judge Holloway clearly doesn't like what the HOA did. So I can keep working." "Yes, the injunction protects you. They can't fine you or take action against your welding setup while this is pending." "What happens next?" "They have to respond to the judge's order about documenting other businesses. That's going to be uncomfortable for them, and we'll start formal discovery for the lawsuit." I want to depose Deborah and the other board members, get internal HOA documents, really dig into this conflict of interest issue. We shook hands and I headed home, feeling victorious for the first time in weeks. But I knew this wasn't over. Deborah struck me as the type who doubled down rather than admitted defeat. I was right. 2 days later, I got home from a job site to find a code enforcement officer from the city inspecting my garage. He was a young guy with a clipboard, looking confused. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Are you Kevin Bradley?" "Yes. I'm here following up on a complaint about unpermitted construction and zoning violations at this address." "What construction? What violations?" He consulted his clipboard. "The complaint alleges you built an unpermitted structure in your garage and are operating a commercial business in violation of zoning laws." I felt my blood pressure spike. "I didn't build any structure. I installed welding equipment 3 years ago, all with proper permits. And I have a home occupation permit for my business." "Can I see the permits?" I took him into my office and pulled out my permit file. He reviewed everything carefully, then looked at the garage himself. "Sir, everything here looks permitted and legal. Your home occupation permit is valid and up to date. I don't see any zoning violations." "So who filed the complaint?" He hesitated. "I can't disclose that." "Was it someone from the HOA?" His expression told me I'd guessed right. "I can't confirm that, but I'll note in my report that all permits are in order and no violations were found." After he left, I called Sarah and told her what happened. She sighed heavily. "They're harassing you with official complaints now. That's actually actionable. We can add harassment claims to the lawsuit." How much more of this am I going to have to deal with? Hopefully not much. The court order should have scared them into backing off. If they keep this up, we can go back to Judge Holloway and ask for sanctions. But the harassment didn't stop. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 more city inspector visits, each for bogus complaints. Someone reported me for environmental violations, noise violations, and illegal dumping of hazardous waste. Every inspector found nothing wrong, and every inspector seemed increasingly annoyed at being sent on wild goose chases. The neighborhood was also getting divided. Rick and a few other neighbors had started openly supporting me, but others had gotten nasty letters from the HOA threatening fines if they didn't maintain their properties perfectly. Deborah was using intimidation to keep people in line. Then things escalated in a way I didn't expect. I was in my garage working on a custom railing project when someone started pounding on the door. I shut off my welder and opened it to find 2 police officers standing there. My stomach dropped. "Can I help you, officers?" The older one, a sergeant with gray in his hair, looked apologetic. "Are you Kevin Bradley?" "Yes. We need to ask you some questions. There's been a report of threats made against a neighbor." "What? I haven't threatened anyone, Mrs. Deborah Patterson claims you came to her house 3 days ago and threatened to burn down her house if she didn't drop the HOA complaints against you." I stared at him in disbelief. "That's completely false. I haven't been to her house in weeks, and I certainly never threatened anyone. Where were you 3 days ago around 7 p.m.? I was at Home Depot buying materials. I have the receipt, and I'm sure I'm on their security cameras. The younger officer spoke up. Can you show us the receipt? I went to my truck and found the receipt in the glove box. It was time-stamped at 7:14 p.m. 3 days ago from the Home Depot on Academy Boulevard. The sergeant examined it, then nodded. This provides you an alibi, but we still need to document the complaint. Mrs. Patterson seemed very certain about what happened. She's lying. She's been harassing me for weeks because she wants to shut down my business. I have a lawyer and court documents about all this. We'll note that in our report. Do you have your lawyer's contact information? I gave them Sarah's card. They took notes, looked around the garage without finding anything suspicious, and left. But I was shaken. False police reports were a crime. Deborah had crossed a serious line. I called Sarah immediately. She was livid when I explained what happened. She filed a false police report. That's a misdemeanor in Colorado. I'm adding it to the lawsuit, and I'm also recommending you file a police report about her false report. Will that actually go anywhere? It might. Especially if we can prove she's made multiple false reports. The city inspector complaints might count too. This is insane. Why is she so determined to destroy me? Because she's losing and she knows it. People like her can't handle being told no. They escalate until they either win or self-destruct. I'm betting on self-destruct at this point. Me too. But be careful. If she's willing to lie to police, she might do something even more reckless. That warning proved prophetic. Friday night, I was inside my house watching TV when I heard glass breaking in my garage. I rushed out to find one of my garage windows shattered and a brick lying on the floor surrounded by broken glass. Tied to the brick was a note written in angry capital letters. Leave the neighborhood or next time it's your house. I didn't touch anything. I called the police immediately, and the same 2 officers from before responded. This time they took the threat seriously, photographing everything and bagging the brick and note as evidence. Any idea who might have done this? The sergeant asked. I have a strong suspicion, but I don't have proof. Mrs. Patterson, or someone associated with the HOA. This whole thing has gotten out of control. They finished their investigation and gave me a case number. I called Sarah despite it being almost 10 p.m. She answered groggily but woke up fast when I explained what happened. File for a restraining order first thing Monday morning. This is criminal intimidation now. And take photos of everything before you clean it up. Already done. Good. Forward those photos to me. I want everything documented. I barely slept that night, jumping at every sound. Someone was willing to commit vandalism and threats to drive me out. That person was unhinged enough to do worse. Saturday morning, Rick came over when he saw me cleaning up the glass. He looked horrified when I explained what happened. That's insane. Did you call the police? Yeah, they took a report. Sarah says to file for a restraining order against Deborah. Good. You should also get security cameras. I can help you install them today if you want. We spent the afternoon mounting cameras covering my driveway, garage, and front door. The system stored footage to the cloud, so even if someone destroyed the cameras, the video would be saved. Monday morning, I went to the courthouse and filed for a restraining order against Deborah Patterson, citing the harassment, false police reports, and the brick incident. The hearing was set for Wednesday. Meanwhile, Sarah had filed a motion with Judge Holloway about the escalating harassment. The judge responded by moving up our status conference to Friday and ordering both parties to appear personally, not just their lawyers. Wednesday's restraining order hearing was tense. Deborah showed up with David Kresch, her lawyer, and acted outraged that I was accusing her of vandalism. "Your Honor, this is absurd," she said when given the chance to speak. "I would never do something so criminal. Mr. Bradley is making wild accusations to distract from his own covenant violations." The judge, a different one this time, looked skeptical. "Mr. Bradley has filed a police report and has documentation of ongoing harassment. You deny sending code enforcement to his property multiple times. Those were legitimate complaints from concerned residents. Every single inspection found no violations." "That suggests the complaints were not legitimate." Deborah's lawyer intervened. "Your Honor, Mrs. Patterson can't control what other residents report to the city, but she can control her own actions. Mr. Bradley has also documented a false police report filed by Mrs. Patterson." "That's a misunderstanding. Mrs. Patterson believed she saw Mr. Bradley at her property, despite him having a time-stamped receipt placing him elsewhere." The judge shook her head. "I'm granting a temporary restraining order. Mrs. Patterson, you are to have no contact with Mr. Bradley, stay at least 100 yards from his property, and cease any HOA enforcement actions regarding his welding business pending the outcome of the civil case. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. Is that clear?" "This is outrageous," Deborah sputtered. "I'm being punished for doing my job as HOA president. Your job doesn't include harassment or false reports. The order stands. We're adjourned." I left the courthouse feeling safer but also worried. The restraining order might just make Deborah angrier and more reckless. Friday's status conference before Judge Holloway was even more dramatic. Sarah and I sat on one side of the courtroom, Deborah and her lawyer on the other. The other board members weren't present, which I found interesting. Judge Holloway entered and got straight to business. "I've reviewed the recent filings and I'm deeply troubled by what's happening here. Mr. Kresch, your client has been subject to a restraining order due to harassment allegations. That's extremely serious. Your Honor, Mrs. Patterson maintains her innocence regarding the vandalism. She's simply been trying to enforce HOA covenants as is her duty. By filing false police reports and making false code enforcement complaints, the pattern here is clear and disturbing. Miss Martinez, where do we stand on your lawsuit?" Sarah stood. "Your Honor, we've filed an amended complaint adding claims for harassment, malicious prosecution, and civil conspiracy. We're also seeking punitive damages given the egregious nature of the HOA's conduct. Mr. Kresch, has your client considered settling this matter?" The lawyer looked uncomfortable. "We've discussed it, but Mrs. Patterson believes the HOA's position is legally sound, even after losing the preliminary injunction, even after a restraining order. Mr. Kresch, you need to have a serious talk with your client about risk assessment." "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Holloway turned to me. "Mr. Bradley, have you experienced any further harassment since the restraining order?" "No, Your Honor, it's been quiet." "Good, let's keep it that way." She looked back at the lawyers. "I'm ordering both parties to attend mediation within 30 days. Pick a mediator, submit the name to the court, and work this out. If mediation fails, we'll set a trial date, but I think everyone would be better served by a settlement. Are we clear?" Both lawyers agreed. As we left the courtroom, Sarah looked pleased. "Mandatory mediation is good for us. It means the judge thinks we have a strong case and wants to push them to settle." "What kind of settlement are we talking about?" "Dropping all enforcement actions against you, removing Deborah from the HOA board, possibly monetary damages for your legal fees and the harassment. We'll see what they offer." But before we could get to mediation, the situation took another turn. The following Tuesday, I was leaving for a job site when I noticed my truck's tires had been slashed. All four of them were flat, cut deliberately with something sharp. My new security cameras had caught it happening at 3:47 a.m. A figure in dark clothing and a hood had approached my truck and systematically slashed each tire before walking away down the street. The video quality wasn't good enough to identify who it was, but the person's build and height looked consistent with a woman. I called the police and filed yet another report, then called Sarah. "This is the third incident," she said. "The police need to treat this seriously. You're being stalked and vandalized repeatedly." A detective called me that afternoon. Detective Maria Gonzalez introduced herself and said she was taking over the case because of the pattern of incidents. "Mr. Bradley, I've reviewed all the reports. Someone is targeting you specifically and persistently. That's criminal harassment at minimum, possibly stalking. Tell me everything about this HOA situation." I spent an hour on the phone with her, explaining the whole saga. She asked pointed questions about Deborah, the other board members, and anyone else who might have a grudge against me. "I'm going to request a warrant for Mrs. Patterson's cell phone records and see if she was in the area when these incidents occurred. I'm also going to interview the other board members. Someone knows something." "Thank you, Detective. I'm honestly scared at this point. This person has been to my property 3 times now." "I understand. Keep your security cameras running and call 911 immediately if you see any suspicious activity. I'll be in touch." Over the next week, Detective Gonzalez worked the case hard. She interviewed Rick and other neighbors, reviewed footage from nearby security cameras, and brought Deborah in for questioning. Deborah came with her lawyer and refused to answer most questions, which the detective said was suspicious in itself. Then the break came. One of the other board members, Janet Morrison, the gray-haired woman who'd seemed sympathetic from the start, called Detective Gonzalez and said she had information to share. The detective asked me to come to the station Wednesday afternoon. When I arrived, Janet was there looking nervous but determined. "Mr. Bradley, Mrs. Morrison has some things to tell you," Detective Gonzalez said. Janet took a deep breath. "I'm resigning from the HOA board and I wanted to explain why. Deborah has been running the board like her personal fiefdom for 2 years. She's vindictive and abuses her authority regularly. When you showed up with your welding business, she immediately saw you as competition for her son Chad's business. She told several of us privately that she was going to run you out of the neighborhood one way or another." "Did she say how?" the detective asked. "She planned to use covenant enforcement to make your life miserable until you left. When that didn't work because of the fire marshal report and the court injunction, she got angrier. After the court hearing, she said in a board meeting that you'd regret crossing her. I didn't think she meant it literally, but after the vandalism started, I realized she might be involved." "Do you have any direct evidence she committed the vandalism?" Detective Gonzalez asked. "No, but I know she's been working late at night the past few weeks. She claimed she was doing HOA paperwork, but she was always secretive about what she was doing. And her behavior has been increasingly erratic. She's paranoid about you, Mr. Bradley. She talks about you constantly, blames you for everything." The detective made notes. "This is helpful context, but without direct evidence, I can't arrest her for the vandalism." "There's something else," Janet said quietly. "Deborah asked me to lie to code enforcement and say I'd seen you dumping chemicals in the storm drain. She wanted me to file a false report. I refused, and she threatened to have me removed from the board." "She asked you to file a false report. Can you testify to that under oath?" "Yes. I'm done protecting her. What she's doing is wrong and I won't be part of it anymore." Detective Gonzalez looked satisfied. Mrs. Morrison, I appreciate you coming forward. Mr. Bradley, this gives us evidence of Mrs. Patterson soliciting false reports, which is itself a crime. Combined with the pattern of harassment, I'm going to present this to the DA and recommend charges. My heart lifted. Really? Yes, criminal harassment and solicitation to file false reports at minimum. If we can connect her to the vandalism, we'll add those charges too. 2 days later, I was working in my garage when Rick came running over, out of breath. Dude, you're not going to believe this. The cops just arrested Deborah. Like, handcuffed her and put her in a police car in front of everyone. I stepped outside and could see neighbors gathered on the street, talking excitedly. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Deborah Patterson, the all-powerful HOA president, had been arrested. Detective Gonzalez called me an hour later. Mr. Bradley, I wanted to give you a heads up. We arrested Mrs. Patterson this afternoon on charges of criminal harassment, stalking, and soliciting false reports. Her lawyer posted bail, but she's facing serious charges. Did you connect her to the vandalism? We're still working on that. Her cell phone records put her in the area during 2 of the 3 incidents, but that's not conclusive. We're hoping forensic evidence from the brick might give us DNA or fingerprints. Thank you, Detective. I appreciate everything you've done. Just doing my job. You should know, the DA is taking this seriously because of the pattern and the abuse of her HOA position. They're treating it as a public corruption case. The criminal charges changed everything. David Kresch, the HOA's lawyer, called Sarah and asked for an emergency mediation session. He said the board wanted to resolve the civil case immediately before it became a bigger public relations disaster. We met at a mediator's office the following Tuesday. Deborah wasn't there. She'd been forced to resign from the board and was banned from participating in HOA business per her bail conditions. Instead, Janet Morrison attended as the new interim president, along with 2 other board members I didn't know. The mediation lasted 6 hours. The HOA started by offering to drop all enforcement actions and pay my legal fees. Sarah countered by demanding that my legal fees paid, a formal apology, removal of all negative documentation from my HOA file, and a permanent agreement that my welding business could operate without interference. We went back and forth, with the mediator shuttling between rooms. Finally, we reached an agreement. The HOA would pay $30,000 for my legal fees and damages, issue a formal written apology, remove all documentation of the complaints against me, and sign a binding agreement that my welding business could operate freely as long as I maintained my certifications and insurance. They also agreed to implement new conflict of interest policies for board members and provide training on proper covenant enforcement. I signed the settlement agreement feeling vindicated. It was more than I'd hoped for when this whole mess started. But the criminal case against Deborah was still ongoing. 3 weeks after her arrest, Detective Gonzalez called with more news. Mr. Bradley, we got DNA results back from the brick. Deborah Patterson's DNA was found on the note. She's being charged with criminal mischief and making terroristic threats in addition to the other charges. So she definitely did it. Yes, she's looking at possibly 2 years in prison if convicted on all counts. Her lawyer is trying to negotiate a plea deal. The case went to court 6 months later. I attended the hearing where Deborah pleaded guilty to reduced charges, criminal harassment, making terroristic threats, and filing false reports. The stalking and criminal mischief charges were dropped as part of the plea. The judge was not sympathetic. He sentenced her to 18 months in prison, with credit for time served, followed by 3 years of probation. He also ordered her to pay restitution to me for the damage to my property and to complete anger management counseling. Mrs. Patterson, you abused a position of trust and authority to harass and intimidate a neighbor over a petty personal grievance, the judge said at sentencing. Your conduct was deliberate, sustained, and criminal. You're fortunate the DA agreed to reduce the charges. You could have faced much more serious consequences. Deborah stood there with her head down, a far cry from the imperious HOA president who tried to shut down my business. Her son Chad was in the courtroom, looking embarrassed and angry. After the sentencing, Detective Gonzalez shook my hand outside the courtroom. Justice served. I hope you can move on now. Thank you for everything, Detective. You took this seriously when a lot of people might not have. Pattern crimes like this escalate if unchecked. I'm glad we stopped her before she did something worse. Sarah was there too, and we went for coffee to celebrate. You did good, Kevin. A lot of people would have just moved or given up. I couldn't let her destroy my business and get away with it. It was the principle of the thing. Well, you set a precedent. Other people dealing with abusive HOAs can point to this case now. Back in the neighborhood, things gradually returned to normal. Janet Morrison did a good job as HOA president, focusing on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement. The new conflict of interest policies prevented future situations like mine. Rick threw me a barbecue to celebrate, inviting half the neighborhood. People who'd been too scared to support me during the conflict came by to apologize and congratulate me. I wish I'd stood up to her sooner, one neighbor said, but you did what the rest of us were too afraid to do. My business thrived. The publicity from the case actually brought me new clients who appreciated that I'd fought back against government overreach. My welding rig, the equipment that started this whole saga, hummed away in my garage every day, completely legal and certified. I even got a letter from the State Welding Association, asking me to speak at their conference about dealing with regulatory challenges and HOA issues. Apparently, my case had resonated with other tradespeople facing similar problems. A year after everything concluded, I was working on a decorative gate for a client when someone knocked on my garage door. I opened it to find Chad Patterson standing there, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Bradley. I'm Chad Patterson. Can I talk to you for a minute? I tensed, wondering if this was about to start round two. What do you want? I wanted to apologize. For my mother, I mean. What she did was insane and wrong. I had no idea she was targeting you because of my business until the police investigation. I'm sorry you went through all that. His sincerity seemed genuine. I relaxed slightly. Thanks. That means something. I also wanted to say your work is really good. I've seen some of the pieces you've done around town. You're talented. Thank you. Look, I know this is weird, but I'm expanding my shop and I need skilled welders. Would you ever consider contracting work? No pressure, and I'd completely understand if you said no. I thought about it. The irony of working for the son of the woman who tried to destroy me was almost too much. But Chad seemed like a decent guy who'd been caught up in his mother's madness through no fault of his own. Maybe, I said. Let me think about it. He handed me a business card. No pressure. Just wanted to put it out there. And again, I'm really sorry about everything. After he left, I looked at the card and laughed. Life was strange sometimes. A year ago, I'd been facing the destruction of my business and criminal harassment. Now, I was being offered contract work by the very competitor who'd supposedly sparked the whole conflict. I never did take Chad up on his offer, but the gesture was nice. I was too busy with my own clients anyway. The custom metal work was flowing in steadily, and I'd even hired an assistant to help with larger projects. The HOA left me completely alone. Janet ran the board with fairness and common sense, and the new policies prevented personal vendettas from masquerading as covenant enforcement. Other homeowners with businesses operated openly without fear. Rick and I became close friends through the whole ordeal. He often joked that he'd had a front-row seat to the greatest neighborhood drama in Colorado Springs history. "You should write a book," he said one evening while we were grilling in my backyard. "HOA Karen goes to prison. It would be a bestseller. I'm just glad it's over. You know, other neighborhoods are updating their HOA policies because of your case." Janet told me 3 nearby HOAs asked for copies of our new conflict of interest rules. Good. Maybe my expensive legal battle will help other people avoid the same situation. 2 years after the settlement, my business was booming enough that I bought a commercial workshop space across town. The garage had served me well, but I'd outgrown it. I kept some basic equipment there for small projects, but the heavy fabrication work moved to the new shop. The irony wasn't lost on me. Deborah had wanted to drive my business out of the neighborhood, and in a way, she'd succeeded. But not how she'd intended. Instead of shutting me down, her harassment had generated publicity and sympathy that grew my business until I needed commercial space anyway. I threw one last party in my garage before moving the equipment. Rick, Janet, and a dozen other neighbors showed up to celebrate. "To Kevin," Rick said, raising his beer. "The man who took on the HOA and won." Everyone cheered. I looked around at these people who'd become friends through adversity, at the neighborhood that had eventually supported me, and felt grateful for how everything had turned out. Deborah served 11 months before being released on parole. I saw her once from a distance at a grocery store. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Our eyes met briefly, and she quickly turned away and left the store. I felt no anger, just a sort of sad relief that the whole thing was behind us. My new shop was everything I'd dreamed of. Professional-grade equipment, plenty of space, proper lighting and ventilation. I hired 3 full-time employees and took on bigger projects than I ever could have done from my garage. Custom staircases, structural steel for commercial buildings, artistic sculptures for public spaces. I was welding a support beam one afternoon when my phone rang. It was Sarah Martinez. "Kevin, thought you'd want to know. The Colorado Attorney General's office just published new guidelines for HOA governance. They cited your case specifically as an example of abuse of authority and recommended policy changes statewide." "Really? Really?" "Your fight made a difference beyond just your situation. HOAs across the state are being put on notice about conflicts of interest and harassment." After we hung up, I stood in my new shop and thought about the journey. It had started with a simple letter threatening my livelihood and ended with statewide policy changes. All because I'd refused to back down when faced with injustice. The welding rig that caused all the trouble was still running, now in a proper commercial space where it belonged. My certifications were current, my insurance was paid up, and my work was better than ever. The fire marshal's report that confirmed my safety compliance hung framed on the wall of my office, a reminder of when an official authority had validated what I'd known all along. I was running a legitimate, safe, professional operation. Sometimes I drove through the old neighborhood to visit Rick or check on the house. The community had healed from the division Deborah's reign had caused. People waved and smiled, kids played in the streets, and the HOA functioned as it should, maintaining common areas and facilitating community, not harassing residents. Janet Morrison retired from the board eventually, having restored its reputation and implemented lasting reforms. At her retirement party held in the community center, she pulled me aside. You know, Kevin, what you did took real courage. Most people would have just packed up and left. I couldn't afford to leave. That garage and that equipment were my livelihood. It was more than that. You stood on principle. You showed everyone that HOAs answer to the law and can't just do whatever they want. That matters. She was right. The case had never been just about my welding equipment. It was about whether a person in a position of petty authority could abuse that power to serve personal interests. It was about whether communities could be governed by vindictive individuals or had to follow rules of fairness and due process. The answer, hard-won through months of legal battles and harassment, was that fairness and process won. But only because I'd been willing to fight for it, to document everything, to hire a good lawyer, and to never back down even when someone was slashing my tires and throwing bricks through my windows. 5 years after it all began, I was established enough to give back. I started offering free welding classes to veterans and young people interested in the trade. My shop became known as a place where you could learn practical skills and get hands-on experience. One of my students was a young guy named Marcus, whose family lived in a neighborhood with an abusive HOA. They were threatening to foreclose on his parents' house over disputed fines. Marcus asked me for advice. Document everything, I told him. Every letter, every conversation, every inspection. Get your own evidence, and don't be afraid to lawyer up if they're violating the law. HOAs have authority, but it's not unlimited. I connected his family with Sarah Martinez, who took their case. 6 months later, they'd won a settlement, and the HOA board had been replaced. Another small victory against HOA overreach. These days, I'm known in Colorado Springs as much for the HOA case as for my welding work. People approach me at industry events to share their own HOA horror stories and ask for advice. I've become an accidental advocate for homeowner rights. The Colorado Springs Gazette did a feature article on me for their business section, titled "The Welder Who Took on His HOA and Won." It detailed the case and its aftermath, including the policy changes it had sparked. The article ended with a quote from me that I was proud of. I'm not anti-HOA. Good HOAs serve an important function, but when board members abuse their authority for personal gain, someone has to stand up and say no. I happen to be in a position to fight back. A lot of people aren't that lucky. My new shop continued to grow. We landed contracts with major construction firms and public art commissions. The business I'd almost lost to Deborah Patterson's vendetta was now thriving beyond anything I'd imagined when I first set up that welding rig in my garage. But I never forgot the lesson of those difficult months. Authority without accountability leads to abuse. Organizations need checks and balances, and individuals need the courage to stand up when those in power overstep their bounds. Rick and I still joke about the whole saga. He calls it the Great HOA War, and we laugh about some of the absurd moments. But we both know it wasn't funny at the time. It was stressful, expensive, and frightening. Someone was coming to my property in the middle of the night to commit vandalism. That's not a joke. The fact that it ended with justice and positive changes doesn't erase what I went through. But it does make it meaningful. Suffering without purpose is just suffering. Suffering that leads to positive change, that protects others from the same fate, that stands as precedent and warning, that matters. Deborah Patterson finished her probation and moved out of state. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd gone to Arizona to live with relatives. I hoped she'd learned something from the experience, but I honestly didn't care. She was out of my life and couldn't hurt anyone else in Oakwood Heights. Her son Chad's welding business did fine, by the way. We never worked together, but we were cordial when we ran into each other at supply shops or industry events. He'd carved out his niche, I had mine, and there was plenty of work for everyone. The competition his mother had feared was imaginary, born of her own insecurity and need for control. As I write this, sitting in my office overlooking the shop floor where my employees are working on various projects, I feel a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just because my business succeeded, but because I stood up for what was right. Because I didn't let someone's abuse of authority go unchallenged. Because I used the legal system the way it's supposed to work. The welding rig that started it all is still running, older now but well maintained. Every time I fire it up, I remember the fire marshal's inspection, Deputy Marshal Chen's thorough review, and his conclusion that my operation was exemplary. That validation, from a real authority rather than a self-appointed neighborhood tyrant, made all the difference. My story isn't unique. Across America, people face similar battles with HOAs, code enforcement, professional licensing boards, and other bureaucratic entities that wield power over their lives and livelihoods. Some of those entities function properly, serving the public good. Others become vehicles for petty tyrants to exercise control and settle scores. The difference between a legitimate enforcement action and harassment comes down to good faith, consistency, and adherence to actual rules rather than personal whims. Deborah failed on all 3 counts, and that's why she ended up in prison while I'm still here, running my business and living in my house. If there's a moral to this story, it's this: know your rights, document everything, and don't be afraid to fight back against unjust authority. The system isn't perfect, but it can work if you're willing to engage with it. Justice doesn't happen automatically. It happens because people stand up and demand it, and sometimes, when you stand up for yourself, you end up helping others too. The policy changes, the precedents, the awareness raised by fighting back against HOA overreach, these things benefit everyone who comes after. That's worth the cost and the struggle. My business card now includes a small tagline beneath my name and credentials: certified, insured, and court-approved. It's a little inside joke, a reference to the battle I won, but it's also a statement of pride. I did everything right, and when challenged, I proved it in the most official way possible. The fire marshal confirmed I was safe and legal. The court confirmed the HOA was wrong. The criminal justice system confirmed that harassment and abuse of authority have consequences. And my continuing success confirms that standing up for yourself is worth it. So yes, my HOA tried to ban my welding rig. And yes, the fire marshal confirmed I was certified and fully insured. But the real story is what happened in between: the harassment, the vandalism, the legal battles, the arrests, and ultimately the vindication. It's a story about abuse of power and the importance of fighting back. It's a story that needed telling, and I'm glad I lived to tell it. These days, when I see news stories about HOA disputes, I pay attention. I know what those homeowners are going through, and when I can, I reach out with advice, support, or just solidarity, because I've been there. I've faced down the petty tyrant with a title and a gavel, and I won. That's my story. That's how an HOA tried to destroy my business and ended up strengthening it instead. That's how standing up for myself helped change policies statewide. And that's how a simple welding rig became the center of a battle over authority, justice, and what it means to be a homeowner in America. The garage where it all started is quieter now, used mostly for storage and small hobby projects. But sometimes I go in there and look at where my welding equipment used to sit, and I remember everything that happened. The anger, the fear, the determination, and finally the victory. and I fire up the little portable welder I keep in there, just to hear that familiar sound, just to remember that I'm still here, still working, still standing. Because nobody, not an HOA president or anyone else, gets to take away what I've built through honest work and dedication. That's the real ending to this story. Not the settlement or the arrest or the policy changes, but the simple fact that I'm still here, still welding, still making a living doing what I love. Everything else is just details. The core truth is that I refused to be bullied out of my home and my business, and I prevailed. If you're facing a similar situation, take heart from this. You can fight back. You can win. It won't be easy or quick or cheap, but it's possible. Document everything, find good legal help, and never give up. Because your home, your business, and your rights are worth fighting for. And if you're serving on an HOA board, take this as a cautionary tale. Your authority is real but limited. Your job is to serve the community, not your personal interests. And if you abuse your position, there will be consequences. Maybe not immediately, but eventually justice catches up. That's my story from beginning to end. The HOA tried to ban my welding rig. The fire marshal confirmed I was certified and fully insured. And in the end, I'm still here while the person who tried to destroy me went to prison for her crimes. Sometimes, when you're in the right and you fight hard enough, the system works exactly as it should.